Okay, this is week 5 of a series we're calling Re-Signed. If you have not been here, we're going to finish this up next week. Week 6 will wrap it up. I'm going to do a kind of a special one-off message on the 19th, sort of a, I don't know, kind of like a State of the Union, State of the Church kind of address on the 19th. We'll just talk about last year and this year and where we're going and that sort of thing. And then it's Ash Wednesday and the start of Lent on the 26th of February. So the calendar keeps moving on. Week 5 of this series, if you've not been around, this word re-signed, not resigned, but re-signed, the significance of the title for the series is we're looking at the life of Jesus. This is a season in the church we call Epiphany. Epiphany is about, right, God showing up in the person of Jesus and what that reveals to the world. What does it teach us? What does it tell us about things? So we're looking at Jesus' life in this series as what I'm calling a re-signing event. So this is how this kind of goes, right? We all understand that truth is mediated via signs. Like you walk in the front lobby, you look to your right, there's a sign on the wall, and it says restrooms with an arrow. We all understand that's not the restroom. You don't go to the bathroom there. The sign is pointing beyond itself to a thing, a reality that's further down the hall, right, where you can do that sort of thing. And if you're a female, I hope that you're not prone to seizures because our wallpaper in the women's restroom will give them to you. In any event, signs point beyond themselves, right, to things. We all get it. So if I say the word cow, you all are picturing or imagining an animal that chews cud and says moo. It works because you're familiar with the sign, the word, and you're familiar with the thing that the sign points to. But that's language. And language is a tricky thing. It changes over time. It evolves. Words don't mean the same things to the same people in different places at different times. You know that if you spend 5 minutes around young people or in youth culture, you're going to hear them use words and probably think to yourself, that's not what those words meant when I was your age. Or if you are around anybody that's speaking technical jargon, like just a field that you're not familiar with, you don't understand what those signs are pointing to. You can have the opposite problem. Sometimes words or signs are so familiar, they lose the ability to really mean anything. I saw a sign once that said something like 85% of people or signs never get read or looked at. You know, congratulations, you're in the whatever. And we were at a zoo and we needed to find some place to go. Sometimes signs are like they're so familiar, you just don't use them. You don't even know what they're there for. You don't even notice them. Religious language can be particularly prone to that. Right? We can use words like God or faith or the word that I'm going to use this morning, spiritual. And those words just get used so casually. They just get thrown around. You don't really stop to ask, what exactly do I mean by that? What is that sign actually pointing to? Well, what truth is it trying to convey? So when you find yourself in a situation where language or words or signs, they're not doing their job, either because you're not familiar with them or because you're too familiar with them, you have to re-sign. You need a translator who understands, well, here's what the signs were originally pointing to. The truth stays the same. That doesn't change. We just recognize we got to find different signs that point to it because the signs that we've got in play right now are not working the way that they're supposed to. So think of Jesus' life, God coming to be with people in the person of Jesus of Nazareth. Think of that as a re-signing event. God's like a translator. Coming to be with us in a human person is God's way of doing something new, but for the purpose of communicating something old. Something that had always been true, the truth had not changed. But our ability to access it, our desire to access it, those signs were not working the way that they should have. So in this series, we've talked about how Jesus helped people to reimagine what the word God means. Who is God? We talked about how Jesus helped people reimagine what it means to be people. What does it mean to be a human person? A couple weeks ago, we talked about how Jesus helped people reimagine what it means to be God's people. You know, there's always been a group of people who claim to be God's people. Who actually are God's people? What does it mean to be God's people? And we saw that in Jesus, all people are God's people by nature. All people created in the image of God. All people, sons and daughters of God. And I want to pick that up this morning and talk about what it means to be people of God by nature. How do we become people of God by faith, right? Kind of like your children, if you've got children, they have certain latent potential in them, but that potential has to develop over time. It has to be realized through a process. What does that look like? And that's the spiritual life. That's what does it mean to be spiritual or to have a spiritual life. And I chose to talk about this as part of this series because that word spiritual is becoming a lot more common in our culture for people to adopt as a self-identifier, to self-distinguish that way. If you don't know this, traditional religious communities in Western American culture, whether that's Christian, Jewish, or Muslim, they're all declining, and they've been dying for a long time, 50, 60 years. People are leaving churches, and they're leaving synagogues, and they're leaving mosques, and they've been doing it for a very long time. And in the sort of wake or the vacuum of letting go of religious self-identification or self-description, a lot of people are opting for what they perceive to be a kind of more inclusive label of spiritual. See, a lot of people in our culture today prefer to be considered not religious, but spiritual. And I think it's an important thing for us to talk about because in the church, it'd be easy for us, and it always is, it would be easy for us to look down on that or to critique that. I'd rather try to spend time understanding it and see if there isn't actually resonance with our own kind of faith system and religious tradition. There are a lot of good reasons why people don't want to be associated with traditional religious communities. Some they're aware of and some they're not aware of. Right? It is just true. I'm not making any critique saying good, bad, or otherwise, but 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago, there was much more of a generally shared kind of religious identity in American culture. I'm not saying that made us better or I wish we could go back to that or it was more moral or whatever. The reality was, however, that if you went into the business world or into the political world or into the education world, all of those institutions were pretty heavily influenced by explicitly religious assumptions and language. So even if you didn't think of yourself as a religious person, you intersected religion all the time. Just generally speaking, culture had more of a shared religious identity. That's just not true anymore. Again, right, wrong, or otherwise, I'm not saying better or worse. It's just the reality. People do not intersect religion and religious language the way that they used to. And our institutions are not influenced explicitly by religious ideas and assumptions the way that they once were, at least Christian ones, the way that they once were. Okay? No judgment or critique there. It's just a reality. So a lot of people are just not living in a space where religion is a big part of just the general culture. So it's easier to just not associate with religion. Our culture is a lot more individually oriented than other cultures are. Again, that's not a critique. That's not right, wrong, or otherwise. It's simply to say religion, by definition, the word religion means to bind. One of the main purposes of religion is to bind people together into groups under shared beliefs, values, liturgies, ceremonies, rituals, hopes, dreams, fears. Religion binds people together. More and more in our culture, we see ourselves as discrete objects rather than people who are in these interdependent webs of relationships. So it becomes a lot easier to want to craft a kind of individualized, customized spirituality than to submit to a religion, right, that gives you kind of less customization options, if you will. Again, there's no critique there. That's just the reality of the world that we live in. But I think we have to, for us specifically, say nothing of other traditions. We got to be honest about our own. We're a far more historically conscious people than we have ever been. And so it's gotten harder and harder and harder for traditional religions to hide the skeletons in their closet, so to speak. So there are a lot of people now who are very well aware of the sordid history that something like the Christian church has. And I'm not talking about like rogue individuals who called themselves Christians, but they really weren't. Like the institution of the church has dirty hands. And so there are a lot of people who look at Christianity and they think, look, I know that this is sanctioned violence and war and oppression and economic exploitation and slavery and colonialism and all sorts of things. And so I would like to detach myself from all of that, but I'm still a spiritual person. And I might even have an affinity for Jesus. So there's a lot of reasons why there is this kind of spiritual migration into the spiritual but not religious category. It is the largest religious block in American Western culture today. So there are more people today now in American culture who, if you ask them, they would say, I do not identify with any particular religion. I just consider myself spiritual. So that's a larger demographic of people than Roman Catholics, mainline Protestant Christians, and even evangelical Christians. And that has all happened in the last 50 years. There's a pretty dramatic swing. So I want to talk about that word spiritual or spirituality, because it's so popular now, and so many people, again, this is not to critique, it's to try to understand. What's the impulse? What's the impulse? I'm guessing there are a lot of people who the impulse to be religious or to be spiritual but not religious is probably motivated by the kind of commitment or desire that I think Jesus would say, and we'll look at this in a minute. I think Jesus would say, yeah, that is exactly what spirituality is about, ultimately. And then, of course, I think there are other people who probably go down the spiritual but not religious world, and their motives are not nearly as pure or healthy. And Jesus would look at them maybe and say, I don't care what you call it, that's not a road to go down. And so I want to reflect on that a little bit, okay? And how Jesus maybe re-signed spirituality and what it means to be spiritual. In his world, and in the world that preceded him, the historical world, primitive religion and spirituality was, for the most part, more or less, it was about getting something or avoiding something. It was about manipulating spiritual forces so that you could more or less get on with your life however you wanted to get on with your life. So the two most common worldviews in the ancient world were animism, which is like nature worship or nature spirit worship, and polytheism, like belief and worship in many individual gods. I think you're probably all familiar with those. In both cases, the religion that kind of grew up around them, and by religion I mean the cultic practices, the ceremonies, the rituals, the liturgies, the sacrifices, the prayers, the stuff, all of that was about manipulating the forces to get what you want or to avoid getting what you don't want. So you pray and you sacrifice to and you honor the war god because you're getting ready to go into battle. And that's going to be your best way to be successful. Or you make sure to thank the river spirit after a large catch of fish because you got to come back tomorrow. And you're hoping that you'll have the same kind of success. It's about manipulating forces. You start with the thing that you want, success in battle, catch a fish, fertility, rain for your crops, whatever the case is. You start with the thing that you want, and then you work the spiritual forces however you need to work them in a way that you think will get you what you want. I think today, if you've been reading my blog, I did about a 7-week series on self-help philosophies. Self-help is like a $10 billion industry in our world. And I think in many ways, and this is not to judge it, in many ways I think it's a renaissance of that primitive religious impulse. All self-help philosophies start with this, what do you want? It all begins and ends with what do you want? Is it a material thing that you want? You want money, you want success, you want power, you want prosperity. Is it a relational thing you want? You want a marriage or you want healing in your relationship or something with your kids or whatever. Is it a psychological thing that you want? You want peace. You want joy. You want a sense of purpose. It begins and ends with what you want, and then it's just good old-fashioned force manipulation at that point in order to get it. And the forces are sometimes they're different. Sometimes the forces that you need to manipulate are psychological. So in some self-help philosophies, we need to challenge the way that you think. We got to change your mindset. Change your mindset, that'll change your behaviors, and then you can get what you want. Sometimes the forces are relational. We'll talk to you about setting boundaries, about self-care or self-advocacy, and that will help you in your relationships. Those are forces that you gotta work with. Sometimes the forces can even be quasi-physical. It can be about energies and that sort of thing. Say nothing of the efficacy of any of those worldviews. All of them are more or less a renaissance of primitive religious impulse. Everything is about something that I want, and what do I have to do to get it? But it's not just self-help. You need to know that the ancient Israelite religion, right, the religion that is recorded in the first 2/3 of this book that we call the Bible, it begins more or less the same exact way. The assumption is you're in it for something, and if you do X, you'll get Y. So the arrangement between the people of Israel, they were unique in the ancient world because they only believed in and worshiped one God, but the arrangement was more or less the same. It was if you obey God, God will give you things. You'll get prosperity, you'll get protection, you'll get fertility, you'll get wealth. Who doesn't want that? If you disobey God, you're going to get the opposite. You're going to be poor. Foreign armies are going to come over the hills and raid your village. You're going to be struck with blindness and all sorts of things. It's sort of blessings and curses. Do X and you get Y. Don't do X and you don't get Y. That is the sort of primitive religious impulse. It's self-oriented. But here's the thing. That's not bad. I mean, the way that I just described that, you might think, ooh, selfish, self-oriented. That's bad. That's not, we shouldn't be that way. The truth of the matter is you can't not be that way. I don't think there's any other way to be. Self-interest or pursuing religion and spirituality because you want something is not in and of itself a bad thing. And I think it's unavoidable. I mean, you think about it. You come into the world, you enter into this world entirely self-interested. We don't think that's immoral. We don't chastise a 2-day-old for being selfish. We just recognize, you don't even know other humans exist yet. All you can do in this world is think about and care about yourself. You are oblivious to the needs and wants and concerns and fears and hopes and desires of any other person on the planet. You will cry and scream in the middle of the night because you are hungry or because you're scared or because your arm came out of the swaddle blanket, and it does not occur to you that your mother or your father was hoping to get some sleep tonight because they've got to get up tomorrow and do whatever they've got to do. You are 100% self-interested, self-focused. And we recognize that human development is a slow, and for some people it's very slow, it's a slow process of coming to realize and appreciate and actually align your life around the fact that there are other humans in the world. People who have dreams and fears and hopes and concerns and desires that may be different from yours, but they're just as important, just as valuable. If you never get to a place where you begin to operate in the world as if that's actually true, or you're unwilling to live your life as if that's actually true, we have labels for that. We call them disorders or pathologies. We would call you a narcissist or a sociopath. There are probably lots of things that should mark adulthood, but one of the things that is supposed to mark adulthood is the ability to put someone else ahead of you. It's to recognize that another person's important and I ought to do things for them, even if I don't want to. Right? Adulthood or human development is this move from entirely self-interested to growing more and more kind of other-centered and other-interested. Right? So somewhere along the way, you hop into religion. Somewhere in your process, Religion and spirituality enters your worldview, whether because your parents drag you along into it, or you have some experience as a teenager, or whatever the case is. The bottom line is that for most of us, your first step into religion and spirituality is going to be a mostly self-interested step. There's something you're after, something you want, something you don't want. People are most likely to pray for the first time when they are in some kind of crisis, right? God, if you're out there, if you're real, help me with, fill in the blank. It really is the only natural launch point. But the only thing that's going to bring you in to a religious community is you're after something. That's not wrong. There's nothing wrong with it. In fact, I think it's one of the reasons that a lot of contemporary Christian preaching is predominantly organized around kind of life issue sort of stuff. I mean, if you're trying to attract somebody who's disinterested with faith, disinterested with the church, you got to frame things in terms of how it's going to help them. You can't judge them for that. So you got to take the Christian faith and you got to say like, oh, you're struggling in your marriage? Well, here's how the Christian faith can help. Struggling with your kids? Here's how the Christian faith can help. In debt up to your eyeballs? Here's how the Christian faith can help. Don't know what life's purpose is? Here's how the Christian faith can help. It only makes sense. We all are self-interested in some way, and that includes how we approach religion and spirituality. And here's the thing. That didn't seem to bother him. Like when I look at Jesus' life, I see people constantly coming to him all the time. All the time they're coming to him because they want something. And most of the time, that doesn't seem to bother him at all. The fact that a blind person wants to see, or that a leper might want to have his skin healed, or a father wants his son healed from whatever's causing seizures, or a synagogue ruler wants his daughter to get better so that she doesn't die, or a mother wants her daughter to get better. All of those requests, people come to Jesus, and the fact that they want something from him or that they are in some way self-interested doesn't seem to bother him at all. He seems perfectly happy to meet people in that place. The fact that we might be self-interested when we pursue religion and spirituality by whatever the name is not an inherently bad thing. I think it's a natural thing. I don't know that there's any other way to do it. And it didn't bother Jesus that people operated that way. That is to say, it didn't always bother Jesus. Sometimes it did. Sometimes people's self-interest did seem to bother him. One of the most famous examples is this large crowd shows up one time to listen to Jesus teach. And Jesus, as he did with everyone, he looked at them and he saw them like sheep without a shepherd. He had compassion for them. He invited them in. He taught them things. They'd been there a long time. It was late. They were getting hungry. And all of his followers, his disciples were like, Jesus, let's get rid of these people. They're obnoxious. They've been here all day. Let's head into town and grab a pizza. And Jesus is like, no, if we send them away, they're hungry, they're tired, like bad things could happen. And of course, the disciples are like, we don't have anything. What are we going to do about it? And Jesus says, I want you to feed them. And so they go wrangle up some bread and some fish, and they bring it to Jesus, and Jesus performs this miracle. Multiplies the bread and the fish, and he feeds thousands and thousands and thousands of people. It's an incredible miracle. Well, if you're reading the story, you just flip a couple pages, and the crowd is back. Jesus got in a boat, and he sailed across the lake, and by the time he got to the other side, the crowd of people had sort of followed him. And they were there on the shore waiting for him, right? And at first, you get the sense that, they must have been impacted by my sermon. I mean, it was pretty good. And then pretty soon you realize, no, they just want another meal. And that bothered him. He was not okay with that. He often challenged religious leaders of his day. They get cast as villains, especially in Matthew's story. They get cast as villains. These were good people for the most part. They were religious people. They went to church every week. They gave charitably to the poor. They prayed regularly. I mean, they're better than me. They were probably better people than me. They were, for the most part, they were good people. But Jesus saw in them what he perceived to be an inappropriate kind of self-interested motivation. He often accused them of doing religious things like fasting and praying and giving charitably because they wanted people to know that they were good religious folk. But they wanted the sort of public affirmation that came with that. And that bothered Jesus. He was not okay with that. So you got to ask yourself, what's the difference? What is the difference? Why is it okay? Why is it okay for a blind man or a lame person or a leper? Why is it okay for those people to act self-interested? Right? To be healed of their blindness or to be healed, to be able to walk or to have their skin healed or whatever. Why is it okay for them to do that? Why is it not okay for a crowd of people to want another meal? They're both self-interested. They're both after something. They're both approaching and leveraging religion and spirituality to get something. Why is it okay for one group to pursue what they're after, and it's not okay for another group to pursue what they're after? Well, my suggestion is, and you probably, if you had to make the case, you can see it. It's about what it is ultimately that you're after. Ultimately, what is the thing that you're after? See, it's not self-interest, it's self. The fact that you're after a meal, or you could use a meal, or you'd like a meal, that's fine. Jesus was perfectly happy to meet you in that place. But only ever wanting a free meal seems to be a problem. With the blind man and the leper and the lame person and the parent with the sick kid, what they seem to be after ultimately, or at least what they're asking for represents, even if it wasn't what was actually in their heart, it seems to represent a wanting to become something, a desire for wholeness, for fullness. They don't want to just see because being blind is annoying, but because we're supposed to be able to see. There's something about being human, that our eyes are made to see, and being able to see is in many ways a fuller expression of what it means to be human. The people who are after a free meal, they're not interested in becoming anything. They just want a free thing. The religious leaders who fast and pray for public affirmation, they're not interested in becoming anything. Certainly not becoming more human. They're interested in leveraging their spirituality to kind of get a certain thing for themselves in the moment. It's a very different reality. I mean, what Jesus is re-signing with regard to spirituality, it's not that self-interest is bad. It's inevitable. We all approach religion, spirituality, God, Christianity, the church. We all approach it because we want something. We want to get something, or we're trying to avoid getting something. And there are a lot of perfectly good and reasonable things to want. I think the issue becomes what you ultimately want. What is this ultimately about? Is it ultimately for you about getting something, whatever the thing is, free meal, power, wealth, happiness, comfort, good kids, a better marriage, whatever. Put whatever you want in the category. Or is it about becoming something? Like the passage that you heard a few minutes ago, I think this is what this agrarian metaphor is about. I think in effect, Jesus is saying spirituality is about becoming something. It's about becoming a good tree. When you become a good tree, you bear good fruit. If you're not a good tree, you will bear bad fruit no matter how hard you try. Spirituality is not about leveraging or manipulating spiritual forces to get something. It's about becoming someone. Ultimately, it's about, if you're going to get anything, it's about getting God, and as a byproduct of getting God, you get yourself. You get the fullness of what it means to be human. And out of that fullness naturally flows a certain way of living. But just consider a child development analogy. If spirituality is ultimately about manipulating forces to get what you want, let's not call that bad or wrong. Let's call it immature. If you were to take a human, let's say an adolescent, and that person were only ever motivated by wanting to get something and manipulating whatever he or she needed to manipulate in order to get it, that is a remarkably dangerous scenario and formula. This is why teenagers make us so nervous, because this is the world that they're in, right? When we come into the world completely and utterly self-interested, all of our caregivers have to frame everything in terms of self-interest. You have to say to kids, do you want to get your bottom spanked? No, then do this. Do you want to get grounded for a week and a half? No, then do this. Sometimes we'll even do this in reverse, like a reverse hostage negotiation. We'll take our kids to the church, right? And little Susie will not leave. Doesn't matter what you do. She will not leave. So you have to pull out the chocolate bar and say, hey, little Susie, would you like this chocolate bar? Well, then we need to leave the park right now, right? Everything has to be framed in terms of self-interest because it's the only language they have. It's the only category they have. It's not bad. It's just where they are. But you certainly do not want them at some point in their life to be making decisions that way. You do not want to be the kind of person who is sitting at any moment in time and your decision is governed entirely by what do I want in this moment and therefore what do I need to do to get it. That's a remarkably dangerous way to live your life. If I'm a typical teenager and a bunch of my buddies invite me to come over so we can get drunk at somebody's house, and I'm still living in this place where life for me is about what I want and how I get it. Well, the rationale, the reasoning, if there's any, is going to go like this. Will this be fun? Yes. Will they think I'm cool if I do this? Yes. Is it important to me that they think I'm cool? Yes. Is anything bad going to happen? Yeah, probably not. Okay. You don't want them thinking that way. Well, you would rather the thought process goes something like this. Am I the kind of person who would do this? Is this consistent with the kind of person I am or the kind of person I aspire to be? Is this the kind of thing that my people would do? Heck, you might even shoot the moon and hope that they say, is this the sort of thing for which I have been created? Is this consistent with what it means to be fully and truly human? And then make the decision out of that sense of identity. If you're familiar with the comedy The Office, Dwight Schrute has a fun kind of quip about this. He says, when making a decision, I say this to my oldest child every once in a while, when making a decision, ask yourself, would an idiot do this? And if the answer to that question is yes, don't do that thing. You want to operate out of a sense of who you are, not just what you want in the moment. And I think that's what Jesus is getting at, and how he resigns us. Spirituality is not about manipulating forces to get what you want, whatever those things are. Ultimately, spirituality is about becoming something. It's about growing into the fullness of what it means to be a human person. And as you do that, the natural consequence or byproduct of that is you simply live in certain ways. And those ways are effortless to you. You don't have to labor to do it. It's why Jesus' words about the words that come out of your mouth are so alarming and terrifying to me. Like when he says you'll be condemned for what you say. Good Lord. But you've all done this. You've said the thing, and after saying the thing, you want to walk it back because you wish you hadn't said the thing. So you say something like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. And why it's so damaging is because, yes, you did. That's why you said it. You wish you hadn't said it. You wish, like every other time in your life, you'd been smart enough and self-controlled enough to keep it to yourself, because sometimes you got to do that. It is a reflection of who you are right now. You don't have to judge that. It's just the reality. What you do in this world is a reflection of what's going on in there. What Jesus is saying is spirituality is about becoming the kind of person who doesn't even think to say it in the first place. Because that's who God is. That's what the good tree looks like. And that's what, when, like my brothers and sisters who call themselves spiritual but not religious, I understand why you'd want to distance yourself from certain religious traditions. I get it. I understand the impulse there. And if what you're after is there's a deep sense in you that you want to become something that you currently are not, I say amen. Go with God. I happen to think following Jesus is the best road, maybe the only road to actually get there, but I at least tip my cap and applaud what you're trying to accomplish. The person who wants to be spiritual but not religious so they can just kind of customize their world and do whatever they want to do because they're their only judge, I don't think they're going to actually ever be the good tree that Jesus says. And I think that's what spirituality for Jesus is about. He calls people to himself because he knows you come follow me, and that's how you become fully and truly who you are. The question that Jesus often asks people, and it's an alarming question. It's a powerful question. Powerful not just because he's got the power to do the thing, because it forces you to be honest. People would come to Jesus and Jesus would ask this question. He would say, "What do you want me to do for you?" How many of us would love if somebody would just ask us that question every once in a while? What can I do for you? Now imagine you're having that conversation with Jesus of Nazareth. All power in heaven and on earth has been given to him, and he would like to know what you would like him to do for you. See, it forces you to be honest about what's most important to you. What is the thing that you are actually after? I cannot imagine someone sitting with Jesus and ultimately, maybe at first, but ultimately saying things like, I want to be rich. I want to be powerful. I want to be successful. I want a bigger house. I want my life to be more comfortable. I just want to be happy. I want a new car. I want all of my problems to go away. Why not, Jesus, I want to be good. I want to be full of mercy. I want to love well. Man, I want to be patient. I want to be kind. I want to see things that I work very hard every day not to see. I want my ears to open up so that I hear things that I work very hard every day to try not to hear. I want to be the kind of person who doesn't just assume it's always somebody else's fault. I want to be able to apologize. I want to be someone who's always growing and trying to become more like you. See, if Jesus were to sit with you and say, what do you want me to do for you? Are those the kinds of things that you would say? I think that's the equivalent of the blind man saying, I just want to see. And spirituality is about becoming fully and truly what it means to be human by pledging our allegiance to, aligning ourselves, walking behind, walking with the God revealed in Jesus. Jesus is the good tree. And when we come to him and when we give ourselves to him and when we follow him and listen to him and learn from him, slowly, we become good trees. And that is us living into what it means to be fully human, which is to be truly spiritual, regardless of what you call it. That's what it looks like. And I think that's what Jesus wants for all of his children, all of us. This morning, we're going to finish our service by taking communion together. If you're new to us, if this is your first time with us, I want you to know that our communion table is open. We kind of see communion almost as a response to the word, to the service. Like if you're sitting in the room this morning and you're going, yeah, okay, I want to follow Jesus. I don't know what that means. Or you're just joining the rest of us. We're all trying to figure that out too. But if you leave this place today and you're thinking, I want to follow Jesus this week. I want to do that as best I can. I think that's what Jesus is. Come to the table then. Come to the table. Come join us. Come be a part of the church. Come be a part of the spiritual community that's saying, hey, spirituality is about becoming truly and fully who we are. And we do that by following Jesus. And everybody's invited into that. So come and join us. Our communion tables are on the sides of our stage. We'll dismiss you from the back row in just a second. Come down the center aisle. You can grab a prepackaged communion cup and then just return to your seat using these side aisles. And then you can take that anytime during this last song as you feel led, okay? I'm going to invite you to stand. Let me pray for us as we finish our worship service this morning. God, we thank you so much that you love us and give yourself to us, that we find our true home in you and with you. Father, whatever brought us here this morning, whatever's going on in our lives, I pray that you meet us there. You don't shame us for that or guilt us for that, but you meet us where we are and whatever it is that we perceive we need or we want. But then I pray in your wonderful gentleness, take us by the hand and lead us into better things. Lead us into becoming truly and fully who you desire for us to be, who you created us to be. We surrender ourselves to you. We want to see that happen in our lives. We love you, and we entrust that process to you in Jesus' name. Amen.
And as I